Well, welcome. I'm Leslie Parr, and on behalf of the Center for the Study of New Orleans, the Beaver Lecture Series, the Loyola Women's Resource Center, and Women's Studies, I'm very happy to welcome you to A Woman's Work is Never Done, Rebuilding and Reforming New Orleans. I also want to invite you to our next program, HBO's Treme Spotlight on Music, on November 4th at 7 o'clock here in Nunemaker. Tonight's program features a talk by historian Pamela Tyler, followed by a panel discussion with three important New Orleans rebuilders and reformers. I will leave the honor of introducing these remarkable women to Dr. Tyler. Pamela Tyler is a noted historian of Southern and United States women's history. She earned her doctorate at Tulane University and taught for 16 years at North Carolina State University before accepting a position at the University of Southern Mississippi in 2006. Her essays have appeared in many scholarly journals, including the Journal of Southern History, the American Historical Review, and Southern Studies, and in several books, including Southern Women, Their Institutions, Their Communities, Louisiana Women, and Before Brown, Civil Rights and the White Backlash in the Modern South. Her book, Silk Stockings and Ballot Boxes, Women in Politics in New Orleans, 1920 to 1963, won the L. Kemper Williams Prize for the best book in Louisiana history for 1997. The editor of the Journal of Southern History and Rice University professor, John Bowles, once told an audience where Pamela was the keynote speaker that whenever he grew tired of having to read tedious pedestrian writing, he pulled Pam's book from the shelf and read a few pages. It always made him feel better, he said, and reminded him that history writing could be a pleasure to read. I'm sure you will find it a pleasure to listen to as well. Dr. Tyler?
And thank you, Leslie, for that nice introduction. All right, I am always happy to accept an opportunity to talk about women's history. It seems to me that women's history is not very well known, although it should be, and sometimes I feel like a missionary. I am spreading the word. I'm going to begin tonight with a quotation. The quotation comes from someone who is very much loved and respected in New Orleans. I'm also trying to run my magic lantern show here. This is a quote from the Honorable Lindy Boggs. There are dramatic differences between the politics of women and men. All of our lives, from the time we are little girls, we are socialized to be compassionate, to think about the next generation, to be gentle and considerate of the smallest and weakest. We are the keepers of the culture, endowed with a nurturing quality that seeks to calm the waters, not roil them, to pursue compromise, to think of the powerless not as problems, but as people to be empowered. Once we are committed to something or someone, we are loath to give up. Women are more alert to prejudice, more fiscally responsible. Women see in other women similarities, shared experiences. Men notice the differences between themselves and other men. Well, I don't think you often catch Lindy Boggs being that frank, but that's a really interesting quote. It may be that you don't agree with her essentialist summation of the difference between the sexes. I'm sure we all know some women who don't quite meet that sterling standard that she just laid out, and we know some men who rise above it. But I think overall there is definitely a nugget, maybe a really large nugget, of truth in this passage. So it's my intention tonight to give you an overview of some of the contributions, unpaid, selfless contributions to our city that women have made over the decades. And the point of this is that this unpaid work has made our city eminently more livable, more humane, and more just. So I'm going to start a long time back. Women have been forming voluntary associations for over 200 years, that is, grouping with other women to accomplish goals. And their approach usually follows a formula. They identify a problem, gather information, propose a solution, raise funds, educate the public. And when they identify problems that are too big for any one individual or any group of individuals to handle, women have tended to turn to the government, to put pressure on government to try to accomplish their goals. And if you'll just think of a certain number of issues that are vital to any city: city beautification, public libraries, prevention of cruelty to animals, museums, improved sanitation, better schools, better pay for teachers, juvenile courts, food safety inspection, humane treatment of prisoners and the mentally ill, public playgrounds. Women have addressed themselves to every one of these issues here in our community. Women's work is impressive. So to start almost at the beginning, in 1727, 12 Ursuline nuns arrived here from France. They were originally intended for nursing in this fever-ridden climate, but the nuns also expanded their mission. Tending the sick, yes, but also reforming the undisciplined, educating girls, sheltering the homeless, sometimes even sheltering abused women who had violent husbands. The nuns' work provided a safety net when families failed to carry out their responsibilities, whether from death or from violence or from poverty. Well, that's interesting. That's their mission. But within 3 years of the arrival of the nuns, a group of elite plantation mistresses in the company of some humble women of more humble station, the wives of soldiers and merchants and workers, approached the nuns. They went to the sisters about organizing a women's confraternity, and their members would pledge to honor the Virgin Mary not by prayers alone, but, as they said, by all the conduct of their lives. And this group of Catholic women, back in the mid-1700s, began to meet weekly at the convent for prayer sessions, and they raised funds for the chapel. They instructed their children in the ways of religious devotion. They pledged to care for each other in sickness and in death. And the most interesting thing to me is that they organized to minister to the city's poor. There, an early example of women grouping together to meet needs that weren't being met. Well, early in the next century, a group of Protestant women in Uptown, on the other side of Canal Street, moved to provide for homeless children. 150 women pledged $8 each in 1817. And they pledged this money toward the creation of a home for poor orphaned girls. So, working with their initial $1,200, these women, who christened themselves the Female Charitable Organization, created an institution that eventually became the Poydras Home. They named it the Poydras Home because they had a generous benefactor, Julian Poydras, who gave them some real estate, which they managed beautifully so that they could create a revenue stream, so that they could find a way to meet their obligations, to repair the roof, mend the fences, hire staff, meet their operating expenses, and expand when they needed to. So through epidemics and floods and the Union occupation of this city and financial reversals, the women of the Poydras Home managed to operate their institution without interruption. Now, and of course, they're still going, although about 50 years ago, as the need for institutional care for homeless children declined because of foster care, they shifted, and now the Poydras Home houses elderly women. Well, in the years before the 19th Amendment, women without the vote still managed to affect the distribution of government resources. By their organized energies, women were able to improve the community in many ways without voting. This is a photo of Sophie Wright. You live in New Orleans, you know the name Sophie Wright. This small, frail woman, encased in a steel brace, unable to walk without the use of crutches. She initially earned her city's admiration because she founded and guided and expanded a free night school for poor working boys. How did she pay for it? She paid for it with the profits from her prosperous day school for girls. So in her free time, which I can hardly imagine, she's teaching girls by day and boys by night, but in her free time, Sophie Wright worked with other women. She joined women's groups to accomplish things that meet needs that weren't being met. She worked with the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Congress of Mothers, which is the forerunner of the PTA, the King's Daughters, and the Women's Christian Temperance Union. She pressed government to raise funds for an annex for crippled children on one of the hospitals here. She lobbied the legislature successfully to raise standards for nurses, educational standards, and she worked to establish the first public playgrounds in the city. Believe it or not, before 1902, there was not one public playground in New Orleans. Where did kids play? Children from the comfortable classes played in their shady green backyards, and children from the working class played in the street. And so a group of women managed to begin the creation of playgrounds. In 1896, 150 African American women formed a group called the Phyllis Wheatley Society. And their goal was to raise money to establish the Phyllis Wheatley Sanitarium for, quote, the hospitalization of Negroes and the training of Negro nurses. They started really humbly. 1 room, 7 beds. And from that beginning came the institution that we know as Flint Goodrich, which became a 4-story, 150-bed hospital. And for much of the 20th century, Flint Goodrich provided the only private care for African Americans in the city of New Orleans. It started with women. In 1898, Louisiana adopted a new state constitution, and this offered a crumb to voteless women because the new constitution allowed property-owning women to vote, but only on issues that involved taxation. So, in New Orleans, there was a proposal to raise the millage rates so that we could create a sewerage and water board. Imagine, we didn't have one as of 1898. Drainage was non-existent. The disposal of sewerage is something you don't even want to think about. And so this proposal would be placed on the ballot. Anticipating that many women would be reluctant to actually go to the polls, that they would be too timid to go, these 2 women, Kate and Jean Gordon, made it their business to go from home to home and collect the proxies of women who would prefer not to vote in person. And after their methodical canvass, on election day, the Gordons cast some 300 proxies, and the measure narrowly passed. The Times-Picayune wrote that the Gordons probably did as much work for the special tax as all the men of the city put together. And I think the Picayune probably got it right. The mayor gave them a gold-handled umbrella, and a civic businessmen's group gave them a gold medal. So this is the tangible reward that they got. But the intangibles, the intangible reward that these women got is what interests me. A sense of efficacy, an outlet for their talents, a feeling of virtue, mental stimulation, public recognition. These things are what one historian of women calls the psychic dividends of an invisible career. So the creation of the Sewerage and Water Board comes over a century ago thanks to women. Now, you probably also know the name Eleanor McMain. Eleanor McMain was the director of a settlement house in the Irish Channel, Kingsley House, and she was director there from 1901 to 1932. The settlement house started as a free kindergarten for the children of working mothers, but she expanded it quickly. A lending library, a mother's club, activities for older kids, a swimming pool, athletic teams, a lot of things happening at Kingsley House. In her free time, and again, I marvel that she had free time, Eleanor McMain joined several women's associations. She joined the Day Nursery Association, the New Orleans Playground Committee, and the Anti-Tuberculosis League. These are groups of women working, obviously, for certain causes. Now, this is an era when unbridled capitalism allowed employers to hire women and children and pay them much, much less than they paid men. Child labor was a very real part of Southern history at that point. Eleanor McMain and a group of women lobbied the legislature trying to push through some factory regulation laws. After observing the industrialists and their lobbyists in operation up in Baton Rouge and seeing that they blocked the bill, Kate Gordon, who was a friend of Eleanor McMain's, had this comment. Not knowing any better, she said, one would have been convinced that the most helpful, remunerative, educational place in the entire world in which to develop children was a mill or an oyster cannery. One fairly tingled to spend the rest of life shucking oysters or peeling shrimp, she says. Well, eventually, Eleanor McMain, Jean Gordon, Kate Gordon, and others persevered, and they enjoyed success on the factory regulation and on a bill that required compulsory school attendance for children. You have to remember that women's suffrage is a really recent development. The grandmothers of some people in this room could not vote because they were women. I want to tell you an eye-opening incident that showed women the disabilities that they had because of their sex. In addition to not being able to vote, what else couldn't they do? In the late 19th century, a poor German woman lay on her deathbed at St. Anna's Asylum. She decided to make a will to leave her small bank account to that institution. And so some members of the board of directors at St. Anna's came to her deathbed to witness the will. She left them $1,000. The will turned out to be completely invalid because as women, they had no right to witness a will. This woman, Caroline Merrick, was one of the members of the board of directors at that hospital, and she had this to say. She said, the bequest went to the state and the women went to thinking. And as they thought, they realized that they needed the vote. Caroline Merrick formed the first women's suffrage association here in New Orleans. It was a group called the Portia Club in 1892. Other women soon followed suit, and you get the ERA Club and the Louisiana Women's Suffrage Association. Women were worried that voting was not ladylike, and men didn't do a lot to disabuse them of that thought. If you just look at this cartoon and see that a voting woman means an emasculated man, there was a great deal of concern among some women that being mixed up in politics would somehow compromise their special womanly purity. And there were lots of cartoons like this that the anti-suffrage movement circulated. In a city with a lurid political history like ours, thinking that politics was dirty was not such a far-fetched assumption. In addition, the voting polls themselves were often placed not in public buildings, but in bar rooms or corner grocery stores, places like this. So for a woman to go to the polls was transgressing in a space where she had never been welcome in some cases. In fact, after the women's suffrage movement passed, and women here were invited to come and register in the fall of 1920, the Orleans Parish voter registrar told the Times-Picayune that he would have a graduate nurse and 5 nurses' aides on duty and in the registration office, presumably because women might be so overcome by the enormity of what they were doing in registering to vote that they might need medical attention. So it's going to take a lot to overcome the old attitude that women are emotional and weak and men are rational and strong, and politics is better left to the rational strong. Now, even after suffrage came in 1920, women were very slow to register to vote here in New Orleans. Through that first decade of suffrage, only about 25% of women registered to vote. So something had to happen to overcome their reluctance. The League of Women Voters, under the direction of Martha Gilmore Robinson, played a big role in encouraging women to steel themselves and register and overcome their feelings of unpreparedness and ignorance and become political participants. The League educated women about government, about social reforms, and then it prepared a corps of informed women who could go out and urge other women to register, and they could advocate for positions that were good for the community. And by the 1940s, after the League had been in operation for a while, voter registration among local women had increased to 47% of the total electorate. Now, for a very long time, historic preservation was also considered women's work, going all the way back to the years before the Civil War. It was women who purchased and preserved George Washington's home, Mount Vernon, which would otherwise have completely fallen to ruin. Much of the story of the French Quarter is a story of neglect. And in the early 20th century, a great many buildings in the quarter were falling to the wrecking ball, and the neighborhood had deteriorated very greatly. This is a comment from someone writing in 1945. He said, "There were sailors of all kinds, antique dealers, secondhand dealers, speakeasies galore, a fair variety of criminals, the survivors of a few aristocratic Creole families, whole blocks of prostitutes. The streets were littered with trash, broken barrels, rotting fruit, decaying garbage. This was the real thing in slums." Now, Elizabeth Werlein, who was the widow of Philip Werlein, the proprietor of the well-known music store down on Canal Street, led the enormous mission of rescuing the quarter, of arresting the decline. And so her multi-pronged project was to eliminate a slum, halt the demolitions, lure middle-class property owners back to the Vieux Carré to buy, and promoting the quarter as a tourist destination. She and other women formed the Vieux Carré Society, and they linked domesticity and preservation. They wanted to restore the quarter as a respectable place to live, and they wanted to preserve its buildings. New Orleans, under pressure from these women, became only the second city in the whole nation to adopt a preservation ordinance. In 1926, we created the Vieux Carré Commission, and the commission initially proved pretty ineffective. The inspectors were not doing their job. So Elizabeth Werlein organized angry public protest against these lax commissioners, and she charged them with negligence. Ultimately, Elizabeth Werlein won over Mayor Maestri, who appointed more inspectors, put some teeth into the ordinance, and required that renovation and construction projects in the quarter would submit detailed plans and receive the approval of the commission before they got a permit to build. So the fact that the French Quarter remains as nearly intact as it is and is filled with architectural treasures and charming scale is really testimony to women's work. This is Sarah Reed, Sarah T. Reed. She was a teacher in the Orleans Parish Schools for over 50 years. She retired in 1951. During Sarah Reed's years in the classroom, married women were not eligible to be hired as school teachers. The regulations of the Orleans Parish School Board stated, quote, the marriage of a female teacher ipso facto vacates her position and is considered equivalent to her resignation. So not only would they not hire married teachers, but when a single woman chose to marry, she gave up her job automatically. Sarah Reed mobilized community support and had to lobby for a long time to get that policy overturned in the mid-30s. Then she took on the issue of teacher pay. Male teachers were routinely paid at least 1/3 more than female teachers, and I mean people with identical credentials and identical workloads. So it's Sarah Reed who led an overwhelmingly female army to challenge the policy, to take on the all-male educational and political establishment in this state. And they did it the way that we still get things done in this state. They educated people, they circulated petitions, they showed up at the legislature, they monitored the hearings, they didn't go away, and they hammered out logical positions with which to counter the illogical statements that their opponents were making. And they had the cooperation of women's groups like the Newcomb Alumni Association, the Consumers League, the League of Women Voters, etc. And in her boldest move, Sarah Reed teamed with Veronica Hill. Veronica Hill was an African-American teacher here in New Orleans. And together, they challenged the policy that paid white teachers automatically more than black teachers. So eventually, they were able to equalize pay for both races. Now, interracial partnerships were definitely not the norm here as women worked in the past. Women worked with women of like backgrounds. They rarely crossed class lines or race lines. However, some women did make efforts at racial cooperation even during the era of Jim Crow. I would point to the early interracial contact at the YWCA, which is one of the places where the two races came in contact on something other than an employer-employee relationship. The YW stayed ahead of its male counterpart, the YM, in its racial attitudes here. African American women and girls were drawn to the Y because of the opportunities, and the Y began promoting contact between black and white board members as far back as the 1940s. They would meet together to have working lunches once a month. They took a position supporting a federal anti-lynching bill, for example. They undertook a detailed study of local race relations, which were bold moves for that era. Rosa Freeman Keller recalled, I'm quoting now, meeting very attractive women with educational backgrounds equal to or better than my own and charming manners, but we couldn't eat lunch together, we couldn't ride the streetcar together, the normal things that friends do, we could not do. From that early interracial contact, Rosa Keller began a journey that she would not have begun if she had not met some women like that. She became involved in the boards of Dillard University and Flint Goodrich Hospital. She served on the Council on Human Relations and headed up the Urban League and worked to desegregate the public schools, and basically bankrolled a lawsuit to force Tulane to change its admission policies. Other women were galvanized by their experiences at the Y too, and they began working to break down their all-white women's organizations. It was a slow process. Well, the crisis over schools, I imagine many of you know about, but I would want to point to the role that women played in defusing that horrible experience here in 1960 and 61. It was local women's groups that stood boldly in support of the court order to desegregate the schools. And they stood to oppose the legislature when the legislature decided to oppose the court order. You have the League of Women Voters, the Independent Women's Organization, the local chapter of the National Council of Jewish Women, the YWCA, United Church Women. The list is long. This is a group of women's groups who publicized resolutions showing that they supported the end of school segregation. And when the legislature enjoined the governor to close the schools here rather than integrate, Gladys Kahn, Helen Mervis, and Rosa Keller founded an organization called SOS, Save Our Schools. And this group undertook a massive public education campaign to advocate keeping schools open and to counter the inaccuracies being presented by the segregationists. SOS members challenged segregationists literally by escorting black and white children through the mobs to William Frantz and McDonough 19, the two schools that were chosen for court-ordered integration. These women worked steadily for 2 years to build a base of public support for the court's decision and to keep safe the children of the experience, both black and white, who were taunted and threatened every day. I think their contributions were extraordinary. So, this is a quick overview, and there is so much more. But I'm happy to tell you that tonight we have with us 3 doers, 3 people who have made history themselves. So I'm going to close down my Magic Lantern show and ask the booth to play 5 minutes of video that will help to introduce our 3 guests.
City. We're not going to have businesses here if we can't put this as our number one first step of reform. It is reform with people with expertise who have one focus, levee board safety only.
A levee board with some experts, not political appointees.
There is a hope and a belief among these everyday people that their collective voice will bring about better protection from killer storms.
The people of this new Orleans are demanding a government that is leaner, smarter, and better.
LaToya is the president of the Broadmoor Improvement Association, the strongest neighborhood association in the city, maybe in the nation. What do you think? She is a wonderful community developer and activist in the city building stronger neighborhoods. And we're just going to ask her to talk a little bit because she is intimately involved with what's happened here at Gloria Day through Apex. And just wanted to ask you, what does this mean for this neighborhood, for the city?
Well, it means that for the first time, really, in a post-Katrina environment, that this community has been able to service our youth which is really the core of any community. And so for us, and having Apex a part of the fabric of the Broadmoor community is invaluable, because we have to focus on from cradle to grave, really from cradle to career when we talk about our youth. And this provides the one-on-one contact and development that we can offer our young people. It provides a safe haven for them to come and be themselves. It provides an opportunity for us to connect, for the community to connect to our youth, because that's very important. It has provided a place of hope and instilling faith and courage and commitment and respect and all of these values that we feel that are near and dear to the community, for us to thrive really for generations to come.
We can beat this. The spill in the Gulf is a catastrophe.
But we will solve it.
It has threatened a way of life,
assaulted a fragile ecosystem,
and compromised our national economy.
This is not a Gulf Coast issue.
It's a 50-state challenge.
It is a national problem that requires a national solution.
But what can you do to help?
What can you offer? Your voice. Speak up.
Let our leaders know that America's Gulf Coast is essential.
But they must take action.
Sign the petition.
We need the strength of 1 million.
10 million.
100 million voices.
You don't have 100 million voices.
But you do have one. Be the one.
Add your name to the petition.
Demanding restoration and protection of America's Gulf Coast.
Be the one.
For this generation, the next generation,
and the one after that.
Be the one.
be the one for pelicans.
Be the one for sand castles.
Be the one for raw oysters and fresh shrimp.
Be the one.
Be the one for all the people whose livelihoods depend on the Gulf.
Be the one for healthy, flourishing wetlands.
Be the one for long days at the beach.
Be the one for shipping.
And national security.
Be the one for sea turtles.
Be the one for safe domestic energy.
Be the one for America.
Sign it.
Share it.
Be the one.
RestoreTheGulf.com.
So our guests are just going to get seated here, and we'll have a little bit of an interview and then invite you to ask questions. Sit as you will. Perfect. All right. Okay. Are we on? Yes?
Are we on?
Good. Okay. Well, I think for starters, I should at least name names. Right here next to me is Ruthie Frierson, whose group is called Citizens for One Greater New Orleans. Next to her is Latoya Cantrell, who is the president of the Broadmoor Improvement Association. And on the end is Ann Milling, whose group is called Women of the Storm. Now, all three have done just heroic work for 5 years. I'm going to ask the three of them to give us the setup, how it is that after Katrina, they established these groups, except that Latoya's group was already in existence. So maybe we should start with Latoya, because you get to start. Because Latoya was already president of her neighborhood association, which is a nice thing to do. But since then, you've kicked it up 20 notches. You're so much busier. When you came back and you guys had your first meeting and you were facing an incredible crisis because of the recommendations that were being made about Broadmoor. Could you talk just a little bit about what Broadmoor was facing when you first tried to get the organization up and running again?
Okay, well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure being here. So one of the immediate challenges that the Broadmoor community faced was being recommended to the mayor that the Broadmoor community, along with 6 others, not return. So we woke up one day, and whether we were displaced or those that were located in the community, picked up the January 11, 2006 Times-Picayune, and that's how we learned what was being recommended and planned for our community. And so as a neighborhood and as a leader of the neighborhood, I'm quoted as saying all hell broke loose, well, in which it did, but it galvanized people to focus on the value of community and to save our neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And we've done that. Absolutely, you've done it. But I mean, the enormity of having read that in the paper rather than even be part of consultation or discussion. So it's at that point that their group realized if they're going to save the neighborhood, they'll have to act, because they're on the verge of being declared green space. Right. Remember those days when they were trying to shrink the footprint so that we would have to deliver services to fewer parts of town? Imagine that Broadmoor was one of those parts. So Ruthie and Ann came back after the storm and founded groups because of the conditions that they discovered. So Ruthie, why don't you just describe a meeting that you had at your house during the holidays, I think, in '05, and what had brought you all together? What was the issue, and what did you decide to do?
Well, we all know Katrina changed everything in every one of us, and it was a wake-up call to all of us.
but we know that out of great challenges, great opportunities come. And over 80%, we go back and over 80% of our city was flooded for over 3 weeks. And yet, in November of 2005, the state legislature, in a committee meeting, refused to consolidate and reform levee boards in southeast Louisiana. This was a shocking, appalling thing, and citizens were enraged. And this was the spark that led us to action. My thought was, well, let's have a petition drive. Let's get enough petitions to get Governor Blanco to call another special session of the legislature. And it was the week of Thanksgiving. Calls went out, and that week, that Monday, 120 people arrived at the House. A good number of people I did not know. But they came together, they were brought together with one focus at that point: levee board consolidation and reform. Because what we needed to do is have a levee board of technically qualified people who could focus on flood protection only and who could really work with the Corps of Engineers because they understood what they were planning and building and where some problems may occur. And at that meeting, Citizens for One was born. It was really a very moving experience because those 120 people left with petitions. We formed our organization. The executive committee was formed that day. We designed pins. Within 3 days, we had a website up and running. We had almost 20,000 people on the website in a minute. And we got 53,000 petitions in 3 weeks. Now, this was huge because that represented, according to the Brookings Institution, 1/3 of the entire Orleans Parish at that time, of the citizens. And it represented 1/6 of all the citizens in the 5-parish area. So needless to say, we got the governor to call another special session. And 1,200 of us, I think many of you in this audience, I see some of you who were there in Baton Rouge with us, dressed with red, and petitioning. And then we trained 100 volunteers by a lobbyist in Baton Rouge. The Business Council paid for that. And then we lived in Baton Rouge for the 2.5 weeks of the session. We never went away. We educated. The media was everywhere. That was the beginnings of Citizens for One. From there, as you know, we took on the assessor reform and were successful in that. And we had 2 statewide constitutional amendments and were successful in both. We raised $850,000. We ran around the state. But the big thing was you found after the storm, and LaToya, we know this, and Ann, that what you did is you worked together. I've never seen a city come together like it did after the storm. And we formed coalitions with reform-minded legislators, with the business community, with church groups, with neighborhood organizations. And it was just so positive. I don't think I've experienced anything like this in my life. And right at the front door, this is how grassroots, there was a box. And people, it said, gave my address, and people would ring the doorbell, and our executive committee would open the door, and in would come sometimes 1 petition signed. You got 53,000, sometimes quite a few. But it was very, very moving, and it was a time in history that I'll never forget.
Right. Well, people were looking for some leadership, I'm sure, that from all of you tapped into that. Well, Ann, your group, Women of the Storm, I know you all had an initial meeting in January of '06, and from that little meeting around a table came something pretty big.
Yes, but first let me thank you for bringing us all together tonight. I think your overview of the history was so remarkable about the women. I think we still have a long way to go, but I do thank you for that. And of course, we'll be with Ruthie and LaToya. We each have taken a different piece of the pie, which is so wonderful. And LaToya is more with her community, more neighborhood, Ruthie's city and state. And our group had a different focus. The Women of the Storm came together on January 10th, which Pam knows so well, because over Thanksgiving and Christmas, I had this idea in having people to Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas that the federal government had not responded to our crisis. This is the biggest natural disaster, man-made disaster in the history of our country. And by January, you're not going to believe this, but only 12 United States senators of a body of 100 had been here. And of those 12, 2 Louisiana, 2 from Mississippi, Alabama, and neighboring states. So that tells you not very many came from afar. And in terms of the House of Representatives in January of '06, only 25. Again, factor in our delegation and our neighboring states' delegation. It was humble pie. And we all knew that these guys and gals in Washington went to Indonesia after the tsunami. They go and do these missions in Central and South America. We know this. In fact, we've tried to track it. And so I think it created this really frustration and rage among women. And so I asked a group of 8 people to come to my house on January 10th. I'll never forget it. And I decided that this would either be the shortest meeting they'd ever been to, or it might, evolve into something more significant. And so these ladies who came, and I just want to make it clear, they were not my dearest, closest friends. These were women across the city whom I really admired, all of them younger than I, and all of them had a proven track record. They had done things in the community, whether it was an educational reform or whether it was the museum or whatever. They had all been involved and cared about the city passionately. And so I thought, okay, these are talented women. Let's get their opinion on should we go to Washington and invite every member of the Congress to come to New Orleans. And so they came that morning, and instead of leaving in 5 minutes like I thought it might happen, they stayed, and they would just love the notion that, yes, this is what we should do. We should get a group together. We should go to Washington. We should knock on every member of the Congress's door, offer them and extend to them an invitation, not just a mimeograph, but a real Southern invitation to come and see the devastation. And do that, and along with that, we had a 3-pronged mantra. We needed money to restore our homes. Our nests had been destroyed. We had to get that road home money. That was number 1. The second thing that we were advocating, we had to feel safe and secure. Levee reform. Levees had to be rebuilt. It had to be done right. And the third thing that we recognized even then was that we had to repair the coast. Our coast was rapidly vanishing. That was our first line of defense. So from the get-go, when we went on January 30th, 20 days after our initial meeting, with a pen, I was laughing at Ruthie saying she did it in 3 days. Well, it took us longer. We're slower. But in 20 days, we did come up with the blue top umbrellas, and we did come up with a pen, and we had a name, and we had our invitations, and we even brought them books on the wetlands of Louisiana. We left a book with them as well as an invitation, all of them. And so we did this in 20 days, and on January 30th, 140 women, diverse women, every socioeconomic group was involved in this. Every race, every religion, every age group formed the 140 women who went to Washington from metropolitan New Orleans and South Louisiana. We wanted it this way. We wanted to reflect our population, and that's what we did. And I have to tell you, when I got to the airport that morning, and I mean, it's just been overwhelming, I knew 25% of the women on board of the 140, which I thought was fabulous because I didn't want everybody on my block. I wanted people from all over, and that's what it proved to be. And we went, and we've continued to go, and we continue to monitor these issues, which I know you don't want to get in right now. But it's just been an extraordinary experience, and like Ruthie and LaToya, you just seize the moment. And I think that's what Rosa Keller did, and I think that's what Lindy did so often, and other women in the history of New Orleans. You just seize the moment. You take risk, and you just do it.
I think it's so interesting that you, in gathering that initial group around your table, you say they weren't necessarily your best friends.
Right.
They were women who had done things.
That's right.
You went after women who had a track record of being involved in the community. You want something done, you know who to call.
And you have to do that.
Yeah. Well, obviously, as you listen to them talk, you sense that energy. They've still got it 5 years later, and I know all of you are still involved very, very much in projects. I'm curious, could you all estimate your workload for the group that you're with, for Women of the Storm, Broadmoor, Citizens for One? How often do you all meet now? You're still meeting.
Well,
how involved are you now?
We are extraordinarily involved. The original 8 ladies, we're now 13. And I know this is going to sound crazy. We meet every Monday morning at 8:30 at my house, and we've been meeting since 2006. And generally, I would say on every Monday morning, there are at least 9 or 10 present. They love this and have continued the focus. We do things by consensus. Somehow, I thought at one point, well, certainly this is just going to dissipate, and really, we're going to take a break and blah, blah, blah. Au contraire. They really are there, they're committed, they're passionate, and I think what I've discovered, and I tease them all the time, they energize one another. I mean, when they get there at 8:30 in the morning, I mean, you should hear the noise level and the chatter at my house. They're just as passionate today as they were in January of '06, which I think is remarkable too. I have to tell you. But we're meeting this coming Monday and reviewing email lists and updating because we think we're going to be going to Washington in the next month or two. We've got to be ready. And so we do a lot of planning, and we have no staff. We do it all ourselves. It's just a humble operation of women who just take on these tasks and do it.
Yeah, and Broadmoor Improvement Association continues to meet, right? You guys
Well, the Broadmoor Improvement Association not only continues to meet, but a part of our recovery strategy was one that we had to rebuild the entire community. So all of our public structures as well, our public school, our public library, of course our housing stock. And so that work has led us to create a Broadmoor Development Corporation that has an executive director and a small staff, and of course a board that meets frequently. We've had to start the Broadmoor Charter School Board that governs Andrew H. Wilson Charter School, of course, that meets because we're servicing kids, 602 kids per day. We also are focusing on just that whole from the library and creating a board for that because the community has raised $2.3 million privately to restore our public library and also a fine arts and wellness center. So all of these things are really under construction now. Our school received a $30 million renovation and expansion due to the work, and that is now open and servicing kids. But the Keller Library, which will come back as the Rosa F. Keller Library and Community Center, is under construction, and the Fine Arts and Wellness Center is under construction now as well.
I thought it was so interesting that you all were insistent that you had to have the library and community center, that it was going to be an essential part of your strategy to have that as a kind of a community anchor because people would come together and they needed a place to come together.
Absolutely, and that the planning process, actually the last time I was in this hall was a consensus building meeting for the Broadmoor Improvement Association, and what came out of that was our strategy of creating an education corridor that will link our public school to our library, creating a fine arts and wellness center, looking at community development holistically, and eradicating that 32% of poverty that we had pre-Katrina, which is 15 percentage points higher than the city of New Orleans. And so by focusing on education, that is the strategy, and that's going to be the key to make sure that Broadmoor thrives for generations to come.
And I do want to mention to everybody that if you have not read Pamela Tyler's Silk Stockings and Ballot Boxes, it is out front. And I tell you, I think it's one of the most engaging books I've ever read. But about Citizens for One Greater New Orleans, I have to tell you that that first year in 2006, our executive committee was they were all leaders, and they sat at that table, and we were out there every day because what we accomplished in 1 year was, first of all, we went out and got petitions signed, 53,000. The governor calls a session. We go to Baton Rouge, 1,200 of us, the first day. We've been trained, 100 of us are trained as volunteer lobbyists. We live in Baton Rouge for 2.5 weeks. I was a full-time realtor and had to retire because I recognized at that point in time that it was one thing or the other, and it became a new part of a journey. But at any rate, 100 of us were there every day for that period of time. The legislators, it blew their minds. They thought, these women, what are they doing? But we had these red coats on, and we got known by everybody, and we were persistent, and we didn't go away. If there was a meeting that was going to be at 9 o'clock in the morning, they said, we're going to change it till 4. And Polly, I know you were there that day. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we stayed. It went till 2 o'clock in the morning. We were still there. So the media wrote up about this. But at any rate, after we did that and we were successful, it passed the legislature. We then had a constitutional amendment, which was going to be not in March, but the following September. And then in addition to that, everyone said take on the assessor reform, which we did. Again, we had to bring groups together in the city. Our website in that first year for the 2 issues brought 1,650,000 emails to the legislators. And we then had to raise $850,000. We worked in coalition with all these broad groups I've said. After these two initiatives were accomplished, and this group of 12 is still together, we recognized, for example, our Criminal Justice Reform Committee of Citizens for One was formed during that period, and they meet every Monday. The Education Committee, which Scott Cowan had asked us to form as advocacies because we were successful in advocacy. Gambit magazine said, you know, this was the #1 story of 2006, these two consolidation efforts. And so people were really with us. This website of 20,000 people today is still as active or more active than it was back then. It's an interactive website, and if you would like to participate as a reformer, go to citizensforone.com and you'll receive the emails and can participate. In criminal justice reform, we came up with 3 ideas. One was Court Watch NOLA, which is now an incredible organization, independent organization, where there are over 57 volunteers. They oversee over 500 criminal cases, and it's just a remarkable organization. Another thing we said is we need to bring all the criminal justice groups together. And we, with the Business Council and Urban League and others, formed the Crime Coalition. And this has been huge. In Washington, D.C., we also go to Washington. We have raised millions of dollars at 3 points, and Mary Landrieu in particular has been very helpful with that. And we also recognized with everyone we interviewed, you needed an integrated technology system across all the criminal justice systems in the city. And we now have the $2 million where that's been instituted. It's coming into effect this fall. In education reform, there are 3 things that we do. We do research very thoroughly, and then we educate ourselves and others. We do it through meetings and also through the website, and we advocate. And we advocate when we're prepared to advocate. And so in education reform, we've worked with Carolyn Roma Shirley of the charter schools. She's president of the Charter Schools Association, and also Leslie Jacobs and others. And this summer we were engaged. Leslie Jacobs brought together 40 leaders in education, and what we're dealing with is really how do you come up with a governance issue? How do you come up with governance for the schools? Because we are no longer a school system, we're a system of schools. This is a very complex thing. When the BGR and Cowan Institute came up with ideas to bring people with every thought of how you do this. I mean, you know, coming from different points of view together. Leslie held 6 5-hour meetings this summer, and at the very last meeting, we came to a consensus. It was like seeing the Constitution written, because it was really challenging. And that's what we see. You sit at these tables with people in the Crime Coalition from every community. It's not African American and white, it's Arab American, I don't know if you say Arab American. It is the Vietnamese community. We work with the Hispanic community, and that is really how we're rebuilding our city. And the only way we're going to do it is through education and dealing with alternatives, because our committee, Citizens for One Criminal Justice Committee, is focused on the juvenile. And they actually won the Juvenile Justice Award for the state because very few organizations are committed to juvenile justice. They start at a higher level, and that's not where it starts. We really need to deal with prevention. In addition to that, in ethics reform, we worked very hard with other groups to bring in an inspector general, and we have one of the members of our executive committee is actually on the ethics review board, and we're very proud of her. And in addition to that, we also worked on the master plan with the force of law. As chairman of the organization and founder, it really is one of those overview kinds of jobs because the team leaders in each one of these fields is an expert. They're a real leader on their own.
Yeah, that's an amazing agenda that you all have.
That is what is so exciting. That's what's so exciting. So we have different levels. We have people who serve on these committees and have served on these committees since their inception. We have the executive committee, and then in turn we have this huge group of people who make all the difference when we go to Baton Rouge. And I have to mention one last thing. Where do you get things done? It's city things. City things we care about happen in Baton Rouge. That's the wake-up call. They pass legislation that affects us on a daily basis, and we need to be there. We need to be advocates to see that our city is going to be able to be run the way it's supposed to
Yeah,
be.
and I know all of you have worked with all three levels of government, city and state and federal. And I'm going to tell you something that Rosa Keller said to me once when I interviewed her 25 years ago, so maybe things have changed. But she said, you know, Pam, men to this day don't expect women to have good sense. And I just wonder if you have run into any of that condescending or patronizing attitude as you deal with people in government. I'm just curious if you've got stories or if everything's
I have
been
a
wonderful and sunny.
story.
Yeah.
Because actually we were in Baton Rouge, Polly, I know you were there, and we were in a committee meeting, and this one representative sitting in front of me was, he said, he kind of turned around like those women, and there was an African-American reporter, a national African-American reporter, and she took my arm and she just grabbed me and pulled me out of the room and said, "How do you feel about that?" And it was just so great because it was really in evidence. We were told before we got there it was a good old boy system. And, what I found is that the thing I liked is that in the long run, we were taught you do not attack individuals. You're dealing with issues. Stick to the issues. Somebody's with you one time and not with you another. And so when you work that way, you gain respect. And I feel our organization over these 5 years has gained a tremendous amount of respect in Baton Rouge because we're up there for every session, depending, on issues that we're involved in. And we admire a lot of those legislators who had to rise above their parochial area to work for what was happening to our region. It was very inspiring.
So how about the Old Boy Network? Have y'all had to bump into it very much?
Yes, absolutely. What we did is we feel that whenever the women are in Washington, and also you have to remember, we interface with our national leaders by coming down here. Since we started this in January of 2006, when I gave you those first statistics of 12 senators, well, we're up to 60 senators have been to visit New Orleans, the area, the Gulf Coast. And in the House side, we started with 25, and we're over 160 who have come down. So we are not running to Washington every week. We've had wonderful, really, relationships with so many people because of their coming here, as well as going there. But what we've always found, and I'm sure each of you in this room will agree, is that you've got to be prepared. And you can use your Southern charm, and you can be attractive, and I can tell you, I watched some of my great-looking, younger Women of the Storm with Joe Biden. He loved the Women of the Storm. I can guarantee he knows this. He knows that the joke was he just touched everybody, but you got it? But he really does respect us because he was just taken by this, all these women who were so charming and everything every time we went. But you've got to know the information. You've got to know what you're after, and when you sit down with a congressman or a senator, you can get only so far with that charm and everything else, but you've got to understand the issues and be prepared. So we did kind of laugh at some of them, but in the end, I think, as Ruthie says, they begin to respect you. And as I tell you, when they've come down here, they know the ladies with the blue top umbrellas and, like you with your red coats and stuff like that. But they also respect that you know the positions.
Right, absolutely.
And I'm sure LaToya, too.
No, I really would just echo everything you just said. You definitely have to know what you stand for. And you go in there, standing tall, head up, and stick straight, stick to the course, stay in your lane and on the issues, and you do get the respect. My approach, I really didn't care if it was, male or female. If you know what you stand for, and what you're fighting for, and then what you really have to lose. And we were up against losing our community. And so hey, bring it on. My attitude was line up. I'll take you one at a time. Absolutely.
And I want to tell you, with the Women of the Storm, when these dignitaries are here, and whether it's foundation people or congressional people, we take them to LaToya's neighborhood. And I want you all to drive down there now, because the sign up there for the library and all the good things that are happening, it's so much fun because we take them on these tours when they come. That was one of the things that we do, is that we make sure that everybody drives through the neighborhoods and realizes it's not just the 9th Ward or the lower 9th or the upper 9th. It's the whole city. everybody was impacted this. And so we go down to podium and we weave through and we tell about Latoya and what you're doing. But if you go now, you'll see the construction, everything's just, it's extraordinary.
It's fabulous. And also,
Really
I
good.
think Latoya really nationally has been noted as really, of all the neighborhoods, the person who has shown the most leadership. And you go up to the Kennedy Center and all kinds of places to speak. But we have found from the very beginning that Latoya is one of the great reformers in the city, and we have worked very closely with her and admire her tremendously. And she's one of the people who bring people together, and that's so significant, so important. And you ask how many times we meet. Well, I can't count the hours in a week that this committee, because they are on boards, they're working with their own, committees, et cetera. So it's every day, and it's a passion. But the big thing is that it's these young people, you all out here who are young, are the future. And if we can inspire any of you, and I think you're already inspired because you're doing good things already, but to stay the course, it's so important. A citizen voice is something that makes a difference, and it's heard, and you have to be persistent. There are ups and downs, but stay the course. I know you can do it, and it excites me that you all are here today.
It's nice to feel the passion. I can tell all three of you still feel very strongly. This occurs to me, though. We talk a lot about a work-life balance, and you all are spending a lot of time and an awful lot of energy. The last time I tried to catch Latoya on the phone, she was in Boston. I know that you all travel frequently. What suffers in your life when you try to do this work and balance it with keeping the home fires burning? How do you work this out?
Well, fortunately for me, my husband is equally as involved, if not more so than I am, and we're happen to finally, I'm looking at Bob Thomas, to be on the same issue. But my husband, King, who's head of the Governor's Coastal Restoration Committee or something, or something, Bob, he was on the issue of coastal restoration long before Katrina. And I used to say, pre-Katrina, I would say, King, why are you wasting all your time on this coast that's washing away? And it's really important, you just don't get it. Well, I'm telling you, I didn't get it until Katrina, and all of a sudden, I got it. And so now it's really it's a joy because he's so much more knowledgeable than I am. And so we do a lot of things, we kind of try to complement one another, and having the women's voice, being the advocates, help sometimes. Bob can talk about this. Garrett Graves and the people in Baton Rouge when they're advocating for different issues in Washington. It's just a civic engagement and a civic commitment to the problem of coastal restoration. So for me, we're kind of moving in tandem, which is kind of nice as you get older. And it's amazing that we can communicate on this. And as I say, he's far more knowledgeable than I am. So I don't think the home front has suffered just yet. Maybe you better talk to him, but it's kind of fun. In fact, I think I have to say it's really fun because we're both energized by this and we're both committed to the city and to the state, and we always have been. But it really is wonderful that we are on the same page finally.
That's great. Now, Latoya, I know you've got a little one at home.
She's at a different.
Yeah, she's at a different life stage.
Well, yeah, when you say how do I manage, well, it's definitely through support coming from home, but it's tough. Just in terms of rebuilding my own home, it was never about, never got to decorate. My husband, well, what color you want this? Throw it back like it was, the same color, because I didn't have time. That was just not my focus. So I went back with the same, throw that sheetrock up, get the walls, get that paint up. And, so the home life has suffered because it's, you go to other people's homes who've been through the process and they've really been able to make a home feel like a home. And I think that's still a void that I have right now in my life. I'm trying to put pictures on the wall. I'm trying to do some of the things, but the priority is truly just building a stronger community. So I do have a 2-year-old, and it's her community. So I'm winning either way. It's a win-win.
Well, you're going to be what we call a role model.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I think in life, my stage in life is that I'm now a grandmother, And so Lou and I really don't have the same obligations and responsibilities that LaToya has. And we've always been best friends as well as being very much in love. And it's so we've complemented each other. And Lou's been very involved in the community always, and he's always supported everything I've done. So, from my mother, who just told me, I never thought of myself as female or male. I mean, it's from the standpoint of what I could do, because she always said, you all can do anything. Just love what you do. And so that was the message I grew up with, and Lou has had the same message. And he also likes to cook, which really helps, I might add. But, our grandchild gives us he's the love of our life. He's 10, and he has given us the joy of, the connect with family that is so important, and so do our children. But I would say that the thing that really energizes me and makes me happy is the energy I get from other people. And I guess my greatest talent is recognizing talent in others. And so when, I sit to a table, I can see where there might be a hole, where someone needs to come in to fulfill a certain job or what have you. And I guess another talent I have is enthusiasm, because people, I get very excited about what they're doing. And I do want to mention being excited, Bob Thomas, because I was on the Nature and Science Center board back in the 70s. I mean, Bob, we go back 30 years or whatever. And Bob was the very first person, scientist, real scientist, that said coastal restoration, the levees, the coast was the #1 priority. And we were trained on that board that this was really that important. And Bob, when, I came back, I was a realtor, and people were calling me on the phone, men in tears, because their families were somewhere else. They had lost their jobs. It was just a frightening experience. And I thought, Bob Thomas, I just remember so well how important it was. This was the #1 priority. No one was going to return to the city if we couldn't deal with flooding, if we couldn't do something about that. That was the #1 priority. And so, Bob, anyway, I just want to tell you that, you're a lot of people's hero. We called him the Pied Piper back then, and he's still at it with as much enthusiasm, as much love, and as much knowledge.
Well, I think that's a very nice tribute to Bob. I also think that these three women up here are certainly role models for a lot of people who are going to look to them. And in the women that I spoke about earlier, I can be so inspired when I look at some of the challenges that they took on and see how they worked. And I think it's important for everybody to have a hero. And I'd just like to ask, off the top of your head, who are your heroes?
Well, someone whom I love, and you had her on the screen, I was very, very close, and still am, I still call her, is Lindy Boggs. And she just was a terrific role model when King and I got married, and helped me a lot in the beginning of my volunteerism, because that's what I have done all my life, is just volunteer. And so Lindy played a real part in our lives. She was a dear friend, and I admired her tremendously in the way she juggled it all. And she was able to balance her views, many times more liberal than lots of people in uptown New Orleans, but she did. And I really thought she was fabulous. And we just connected, and we always have. And I'm a good friend of her daughter's, so I guess she's my hero.
I would have to say, when the question comes to mind, my heart just can't move from it. And my grandmother, who is 95 now, instilled just civic engagement and involvement. And she had me as secretary of our little Chamber of Commerce at 14. And but that's how I learned civic engagement and the value and the responsibility. Bottom line, we all have a responsibility.
Right.
Yeah.
This is embarrassing, but I was a very dramatic child. And I can remember, I'll tell you my age, because when I was 3 and 4 years old, I sat and listened to FDR's fireside chats. And when he died, this is how dramatic I was. I went into the closet and closed the door, and I wouldn't come out. And my mother said, you've got to come out. And I thought next to God, FDR was way up there. And, that's when it kind of started. And I was very inspired by ministers, and certainly my mother had a huge influence on me. But, I will say it started very early, And I majored in history. I taught history. I mean, it's just, you know, I've always been fascinated by people and inspired by others. And I guess it started way back then when I closed the door in the closet. There I was.
That's great. Well, I understand that reporters down at the Times-Picayune sort of have a running bet about when they will publish the first edition that does not include the word Katrina. Evidently, we're nowhere near that yet, and I know everybody suffers from Katrina fatigue, so it seems fair to ask how you three keep yourselves on the path. I mean, it's not over. Broadmoor is much improved. It's not fully back yet. The larger goals that Women of the Storm have tackled are seemingly open-ended. Same thing for all the issues that you just named here for Citizens for One. So people must fall by the wayside in your group. You're shaking your head no. And you all have an enthusiasm, but are there any special tricks? How do you sustain the energy for the long run? How do you do it?
I think being vested in the commitment that you make. And for me, my involvement in Broadmoor was pre-Katrina, and focusing on the ills that plagued us then: low-performing school, mediocre housing, slumlords, mediocre library, drug trafficking. So all of those issues were prevalent pre-Katrina. So as we look to rebuild Broadmoor post-Katrina, those issues we still have to tackle. And I believe that we're doing that, but we're not there. We have 16% of properties that still are not back. And that represents families, people, children. And the quality of life, it has to improve, and that's the inspiration.
And the inspiration for me is that, you know, we meet at least twice a month, sometime every week, but our committees also are meeting, so we're going to those things, and we're going to other broader-based community meetings. But the inspiration comes when you get together and you're talking about an issue. You're talking about something concrete in this community, something that's going to make a difference in the quality of life or the future of our city, when you think in terms of education or juvenile justice reform or any of these things. And people at that table, if somebody's down, I mean, we're all down at times, somebody else is up. And that's the way it works. People inspire each other, and it keeps it going. Today, the Greater New Orleans Foundation had an amazing bus tour in Central City. Well, we work in Central City with some of the organizations in juvenile justice and in education, and it was the most beautifully orchestrated tour. And we were meeting these young people who are heads of these organizations in that area. And if they didn't inspire you, I mean, you just go home feeling better. You're more energized, and it's great for my age to be feeling more energized. I like that a lot.
Sounds good.
Well, for us, I said in 2006, when we first went to Washington, January 30th, the third prong of our mantra was coastal restoration. And we have continued to be focused on that and have followed the issue through state with Garrett Graves, who's the head of under Jindal, with Congress, with false starts with bills. We were right there in 2006 when finally we got a piece of the Outer Continental Shelf revenue for coastal restoration. And I tell people all the time, it was on the front page of the paper the first time Louisiana's going to get dollars for Outer Continental Shelf oil drilling. Everybody was elated. They felt there was a huge victory. But folks, the bill says we're not getting it until 2017. And by that time, 2017, we will have washed away. So what was presented to the community and to the state as a huge victory, and it was a first step. Think about it. 2017 is before it will start coming into the coffers. That's the first thing. We were there in 2007, the WRDA bill, the Water Resource Development Act. For the first time, Congress approved 17 projects that Louisiana has in its master plan for coastal restoration. Yes, we all were thrilled. You have to have congressional approval for this. But guess what? No monies, no dollars were appropriated for these projects. So that's 2007. So we have been just at this table going through these issues all the time. I just can't tell you. It's something that you just have to stay on top of. It is so frustrating because we have got to get the revenue to begin these projects. We've got to start major diversions. We've got to get that Gulf salt water out of the marshes and rebuild that land. It's essential. So let me say the good news, what happened with the BP oil spill. We can talk about the downside with the loss of jobs, the moratorium, all the negative, and we all know them so well. But the upside of the BP spill is, first of all, everybody focused back on this area and their vocabulary was expanded. People on national news, you watch Brian Williams every night, people across America began to hear about wetlands, marshes, diversions, salt water. Nobody knew that before that. America has really not paid attention to this part of the country. And this BP spill has given us an opportunity to tell America what we give them. And we've been faulty on this. You know, King and I had an interview recently. We were saying somehow people think about us with the crooked politics and all these things that Louisiana is known for. We've never stressed the positive. And let me tell you what's coming from our area. A third of the seafood industry comes from our coast. A third of the energy. Just think, if the Delta goes and if the marshes go and the energy goes, people in Manhattan are going to have trouble, you know, cooling their apartments in the summer, or California running their cars. We provide that energy. It comes across those fragile wetlands. We have seafood. We have energy. We have the corridor of the Mississippi right here. It's the largest collection of ports in our country. And Bob Thomas said on Tuesday, it could be the largest collection of ports in the world. 40% of the commerce of America goes right out here by us. If we lose those wetlands and we lose the Mississippi Delta, think what it's going to do to the grain that's grown in Idaho trying to get out of this country, or the rubber that's coming from South America trying to get to the factories. This is an important economic engine right here in front of right here at our city's doorsteps. All of this is at risk if we don't rebuild those wetlands. So the Women of the Storm, I don't mean to get on my soapbox, Bob, I'm sorry, I just get so fired up about it. You wonder why we meet every week, because you've got to stay on top of this. And when the BP oil spill came, and these things were happening across America, people were beginning to pay attention, these 13 ladies around the table said, what can we do? We can't clean those oil pelicans. It's not like Katrina where you'd go rebuild houses. What could we do? And that's when we came up with the idea, let's do this video, which you saw in lieu of me. I'm so grateful to Pam for doing this. Let's do a video with our stars who love New Orleans. Tell America what we give them, all the things I named to you. Let them begin to realize how important this area is to them. And then all we ask in return, sign our petition so that when we go to Washington in a month or two, we can unfurl these signatures and show Congress that we have support across America. And so I ask you tonight, I had to get this in. I mean, we've been talking about a lot of personal things, but I ask each of you to go home, go to the web, click on restorethegulf.com. The video's there. Now that you've seen it, you can skip it. All you have to do is sign your name, your email, and your zip code. Zip code's important because what we're doing is we can go to now congressmen, and we go to Obie, Congressman Obie from Wisconsin. We can say we have this many signatures from Wisconsin, or we can even narrow it down to his district. So we want as many people across America to sign, and that's what you can do. Be the one, lend your voice, and share this knowledge with your friends and your contacts. We urge you, put this on Facebook, Twitter, tweet. I've learned all about this. I have to tell you, sorry, I have to tell you, when we began, and this is what I learned with those Women of the Storm, they said we got to go viral, and I thought it was a disease. And I found that it wasn't. This is what we want. We want to go viral. So I'm going to urge you tonight, and I'm sorry to just get off on this, but you know, once Pam played that video, it is so important, and we have over 130,000 signatures, and starting tomorrow, we're going to be in 19 theaters across the South, and we've been asking two companies who have like 20,000 movie theaters across America to play our video, like, you know, during the intermissions. And so George Solomon here in New Orleans has taken the lead, and we're starting in his theaters tomorrow. And so it's exciting. It's beginning to move. And even if people don't sign the petition, they're getting the message that we're important to them. Right. And that's the best thing we can be doing. educate America to the importance. Sorry, I won't
Well,
say another word tonight.
And to play on what you just said,
Had to do it.
to play on what Ann just said, you know, I believe there's power in every citizen voice, and we sent this out on our website and got thousands in return, but every single voice matters. So when you do this and you send it, you can also send it to friends. And that's really important, especially friends from around the country. I mean, anybody you know back in your hometown, leave them the note how important it is. And that's really how these things, how you get signatures, because we really need to bring that signature number way up to go to Washington. I mean, that's really, and we can do it. I mean, I'm talking about, and you all can do it, and we can help do it. That's real important. One of the things, though, when you talk about the terrible reputation we had as a city before the storm. I mean, we had the worst educational system in the country. Now I want to mention in education, in the past 3 years, in 4th and 8th grades across the community, the test scores have gone up by 14 to 16 percentage points. That is record-breaking. This is really the silver lining for Katrina and all the involvement that people have done, you know, what's going on in these schools. As a matter of fact, Oprah did something really great. There's a school called Sci High, and it's one of 2 math and science schools. It's an RSD school. It's a charter school, and it is the number 3 school in math and science, and they are right under Benjamin Franklin and Lusher. I mean, this is off the charts. They got $1 million from Oprah. And, you know, you have parent participation, all those wonderful things. And 2 really nice things, The Economist, we had met with The Economist when we went to, our ambassador group went to New York a couple of years ago, but they wrote that what they saw as the great thing in New Orleans happening right now was the silver lining of education and the reforms that had taken place. And also Paul Gigot in the Wall Street Journal also did an article during this particular time. We went to see him when we were in New York, and he wrote on what's happened with reform. And the Kettering Institute, the Brookings Institute, said that the number one thing they found in this entire community and all the research they did was the reform that has happened since Katrina. And this is because of all these groups and all of us as individuals coming together, working together, and seeing these things happen. It is a new day. We have a new mayor, we have a new city council, we have a new police chief, we have an inspector general, we have an independent police monitor, we have so many, a new master plan with a force of law. This is unheard of. It's just unheard of, and we're being recognized around the country for these kinds of efforts. And we have a lot to say about who we are and where we're going, as long as we just sustain it.
Absolutely. I think Ruthie just gave my benediction, really. So what I see up here is knowledge combined with passion, and that's the combination that all 3 women have brought to the goals that they're after, and that's why they're achieving so much, I think. When I started, I talked about women who, through their unpaid efforts, had made New Orleans more livable, more humane, and more just, and that's what's going on right now.
But Pamela, I would just like to add, well, first, thank you for that, because it did need it to be said that the recovery of this city was done on the backs of women across the board, representing many neighborhoods throughout the city of New Orleans and many causes on the local, state, and federal level. So I appreciate you bringing attention to that. And
It makes me think of one who's not here. I'm thinking of Pam Dashiell.
Oh, absolutely.
Who did so much.
Who did so much, and they found her at her computer, you know, doing work.
A couple of days later.
And no, they were looking for Pam because she had missed a meeting, and Pam never missed any meeting, and was straight from the White House meeting with Lisa Jackson. And they went to find what's going on with Pam, and that's when they found her. So absolutely, thank you for mentioning her, because she is definitely,
And, you know, she would reach out to us, and she'd call and she'd say, you know, Ruthie and Holy Cross, we need to keep the police, the state police, in New Orleans. And so will you work with us? That's what was so neat, that you had people from other communities calling and saying, let's work together on this. Let's see what we can do together. Pam was another great reformer in this city, and at her funeral, it was packed with people from across this community on the rainiest night I remember. It was very powerful.
Well, I think we're at a logical stopping place. I want to thank all of you for coming, and Leslie, do you have anything to be said? All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.